Welcome to shul.com. So we are here this morning learning about what is DAAT Torah. It's an article by Rabbi Alfred Cohen. It's available at jlaw.com. And so initially, when we started, we asked everybody what is DAAT Torah according to them. And I'd given you my original understanding before I read this article. Was DAAT Torah was a person who his entire life, from the time he was born, had only been around the Torah world, only learning Torah, and no secular world, didn't go to basketball games or sports games, didn't read any newspapers, he definitely didn't watch any movies, no philosophy books, sifarim hitzonim, and so when he's asked a question, he answers the question only with what he knows, which is fully Torah, and therefore he's going to give you an answer that is a Torah answer. The problem with what I had with this, like I told you earlier, is that what do you say when someone's about teshuvah? Someone's about teshuvah, 40 years old, he makes teshuvah, he becomes a big Talmid Hacham, Sadiq, and you can tell me, actually, this guy, he's not DAAT Torah. He's a tremendous Sadiq, Talmid Hacham, and he could even be the chief rabbi, but he's not DAAT Torah. And so Sammy came up with a good answer. You're right, it's not DAAT Torah, just like he can't be Cohen Gadol. And so there is DAAT Torah, and then there's also people who are Ba'alei Teshuvah, who are Sadiqim. And so that could be one answer. And it's interesting, he doesn't bring that up specifically in the article, but we're going to actually look at a few other interpretations of what is DAAT Torah and what it is. Okay, so let's continue. All right. Defining DAAT Torah. The Jewish community has been guided for millennia by its Torah leaders. That leadership entails far more than simply deciding whether a chicken is kosher or not, or whether something is asur or mutar. There is also a deeper awareness of the obligations of the Jewish community vis-a-vis other nations and their role on the world stage at any particular juncture in history. The Netziv, who's a Netziv? Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. The Netziv, they just called him the Netziv. The Netziv alludes to this in the introduction to his commentary on Sefer Shemot. After explaining that acceptance of the Torah by the Jewish people is the primary purpose of creation, and that it is the role of the chosen people to be a light unto the nations, and demonstrate that that purpose of creation is only to glorify the Ribono Shel Olam, he comments that nevertheless this truth escapes many individuals, and yet there are many of Israel who have not attained the level of DAAT Torah. Nevertheless, only the Torah is the rationale for the elevation of Israel. It's interesting. It is my understanding that the Netziv here is defining DAAT Torah as a person realizing what it is that Hashem expects from him, how his life's efforts should be directed toward fulfilling the role of the Jewish community, what is proper and what is not. So seemingly from this Netziv's definition, DAAT Torah is different for every person. So for you, it might be you have certain strengths that you could do for the Jewish community. That's the DAAT Torah there. While for you, Sammy, it might be somebody else. And for myself, it might be something else. It's going to change from place to place and person to person and time to time. Where you might have something here in the United States, but if you go live somewhere else, it might be different.
Do you spell DAAT the same way as religion and knowledge? Is it spelled the same way? DAAT?
Yeah, Daled Ayin Tav.
So it could have two different directions.
So let's take a look here. Okay, so he says here, more importantly, the key to understanding how to best glorify the name of God through their actions eludes many. Under these circumstances, who better to guide the individual's actions than someone who is endowed with an abundance of Torah insights? This also was the sentiment expressed by Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grzinski in a letter to Rav Hildesheimer, who had asked about moving the rabbinical seminary started by his father from Berlin to Eretz Israel. Rav Chaim Ozer advised him not to. I told him and requested that he report to others my DAAT Torah, that this should not be done under any circumstances. Rabbi Chaim Ozer explained that when the senior Rabbi Hildesheimer had started his seminary in Berlin, it was done to combat the reform movement. But how can you even think to establish a rabbinic factory such as this in the Holy Land, wherein there are great yeshivot and great rabbis, great in Torah and Yirat Shamayim? He was objecting to the purported purpose of turning out new style rabbis to whom derech eretz, worldly knowledge, is the main thing, while Torah is secondary. We see here an instance of DAAT Torah, and he brings this down in Igrot Achiezer number 270, page 443. We see here an instance of DAAT Torah which clearly extends beyond the parameters of pure psak halacha, deciding whether something is permitted by or forbidden by law. We've said this earlier, that DAAT Torah is generally things that are not halacha, because it's halacha, you don't have to ask. Maybe if you have questions, there's multiple opinions on halacha, you get that out, but that's not what DAAT Torah would be. Here, DAAT Torah is the expression of an outstanding Torah leader about what is appropriate in the context of building up the Holy Land and society of Israel. Interesting. So look here, on the bottom it says, not all questions which Torah leaders are called on to educate fall neatly into a definable category, such as halacha, hashkafa, economics, etc. Often they straddle a few areas and may have broad repercussions. A number of such questions come to mind. When the Soviet Union was under communist control, there were many who wanted to mount demonstrations on behalf of the beleaguered Jews there, while others tried clandestinely to help them escape or to smuggle in religious books and artifacts. When asked their opinion on the best way to proceed, Gedolei Israel had to weigh a number of factors. Whether public demonstrations to help free prominent Soviet prisoners of conscience might have negative repercussions on other Jews in the Soviet Union. The Mishnah in Gittin 45a cautions that it is prohibited to help a few prisoners escape because it might endanger the other prisoners even more. See Rashi, Dibur Matchil Deleka. And whether using up political capital to help Jews in Russia might detract from needed influence to help Jews in Israel. So it might take away. Another issue which needs DAAT Torah is whether to return parts of Eretz Israel to Palestinians and other Israeli neighbors. Here, the isurim of giving away any part of the Holy Land or of lo tehanim have to be weighed against pikuach nefesh problems inherent in the current realities. For a discussion of the interface between halacha and practical concerns on this topic, see the articles by Rabbi J. David Bleich and Rabbi Herschel Schechter in the volume, over here it's volume 16 of the Journal of Halacha and Contemporary Society. Clearly, all these issues require consultations with political and military experts, not only halacha expertise. The proper balance of all these factors is expressed in DAAT Torah. Consequently, it is distressing to hear that when a major rally of Jews to Washington was called in spring 2002, there was a difference of opinion about attending. Since Rav Neuberger of Ner Yisrael Yeshiva was in favor of going, and he's certainly an individual with impeccable credentials in the Torah world, and furthermore is recognized and exceptionally astute in dealing with political matters, it is hard to understand how there could be a contrary opinion in the Torah community. The failure to follow his advice is disheartening. And to those who would like to feel that the opinions expressed as DAAT Torah are indeed entitled to that lofty encomium. So what he says here is the issue of DAAT Torah is a little bit more complicated. And not only is it more complicated, we see what happened here in Israel, where the Gilad Shalit was a soldier in Israel, he was kidnapped by Hamas, and subsequently, in order to trade him off, they had given prisoners, I think something like 1,000 prisoners for him, for one soldier. Okay, there's a whole halacha discussion in that in detail, whether that's permitted or not. Okay, they got him back. Okay? One of those individuals who they released was the mastermind between the Hamas attack on October 7th. He stated he was going to do it, and he went and he did it. So one needs to understand that this needs major halacha and DAAT Torah on these type of things. For example, they had Gush Katif. They were in Gaza, and that Jewish community there, I think something like 10 or 15,000 people. And being there had some form of a security. It was a risk, but there was a form of security. They uprooted all the Jews, gave back the land to Gaza, and seemingly the Palestinians there ended up voting in Hamas and making it into a terrorist state. And what ended up happening is that much more problems came from giving up the land and trading back the prisoners than what it solved. Well, so it's solved that they got back one soldier. Hazak ubaruch. Now I'm not going into the halacha there's certain mishnayot and certain halacha and gemariot that talk about it. It needs a very thorough example, but this goes even further to discuss whether or not one is to release hostages like they're doing now in Israel, which is great, they're all coming home. But why are women and children put first? In halacha, is that true? Do we say that younger or older makes a difference in saving lives? Generally, the answer is no. All life is equal.
Compassion.
It's compassion, but it's not Torah. It's important to know that. Now, again, we're not going to go into the detail because it needs a very thorough review, and I have to review the notes and with a few poskim to understand it on a clear enough level to talk about it. But seemingly, there's also what's the reality. The reality is, it failed, and it failed big time. And the fact that this was a result of a previous negotiation that went sour, or was successful and went sour, it shows us that DAAT Torah has to be looked. And leave aside, they had this. Originally they had when they had these kidnapped. When they had all the 240 plus that were kidnapped, what ended up happening? They ended up putting these posters all over. Originally, I thought that was a great, fantastic idea. I really did. Only now, looking back, am I thinking that it probably was not a good idea to do this, to putting up these kidnapped posters. It did nothing but stir up everybody against the Jewish people even more. It created much more Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, and it did nothing for them. It did zero. Hamas didn't release them because of those posters. Nothing. It didn't help. It didn't help anybody. It didn't help anybody in any way. It only stoked people. There were more protests against it, and it just. Now I understand that everyone wants.
How do we know it didn't do anything? Maybe this is actually push.
Well, I'll tell you how we know it didn't do anything. Because how did it ended up getting solved? By Israel going into Gaza and showing a form of military prowess in order to go back and get them. When there's 300,000 plus soldiers on the front lines, and when they were trying to defend themselves to get back all these hostages, that's what Hamas caved into. Hamas didn't cave into any posters.
This is also put pressure on them because America did some, is American kidnapper.
You're right. So that's a good point. I think the Thailand kidnapper, the ones they kidnapped, was a mistake. I think they're like, oh, whoops, we got the wrong people here. Sorry, send them back. They just didn't realize that happened. But you're right. You're saying did it have pressure from the American side? I don't think the Hamas cares about America. And so it might have, from the American side, given them compassion. But again, Hamas caves into the response. That's the only thing they caved into. They didn't cave into anything else. That's what they said. Let's do a ceasefire. That's why they didn't say, all right, take down the posters.
They care about what Qatar said, what Iran said, because this is where they get the fund. This is where they get the money.
The money, and they also know that that's why there's very little terrorism there. There's very little terrorism in those countries because they know how to deal with these type of situations in the right way. And I'm not going to say how they deal with it, but they deal with it in the right way. My parents are Lebanese refugees. I can tell you, my parents have seen how they dealt with this in those countries. There's no right and left. They want to get something done. They take care of it. There's no. They don't care about human rights, civil rights. Nothing. It's all. They have to. If they have to take care of something. And by the way, seemingly they are right. Because if you look in those places, it seemingly doesn't exist, these type of radical things. But the thing that hurts the most is that they literally released a guy from prison that did all this. For what? For one soldier? This has to be reviewed by Halacha. And again, I don't know all the details of it, but from a reality and a point of view of watching it, something here went wrong. It has to be, because if this is going to be constantly the case, they're releasing people now. What if the next person they release ends up has b'shalom?
I heard that the most rabbi for the Iska,
Well, it's like it's a relative, compared to previous deals, it's pretty good, but objectively not good. It used to be what, 1,000 soldiers to 1? 500 to 1, now it's 3 to 1, so it's like you're improving, but that doesn't change.
It's because it's because they took so many.
I know.
When they took one, it was okay, but they took so many, and that's where
exactly.
And the Mishnah talks about
the people that they said they released. It's not like those crazy terrorists. It's like a woman, his kids, they did something bad. I'm not saying that they terrorists, but the different.
Their goal, by the way, was to kill.
Yeah.
No, they just failed.
But
They failed.
They don't have like an influence like this guy. His name Sinwa, as a woman, his kids.
Yeah, that's the.
Listen, we don't really know. You're underestimating the power of people. It could be a woman, it could be a kid. That kid could grow up. We don't know.
So that you see all this, forget them. It's that concept. You're sending back all these quote unquote freedom fighters back to there. What are you going to do with all the 16 to 21-year-old military age male? They're going to get motivated and inspired.
And by the way, and they're saying that they're going to do it.
Exactly.
They're being open about it. They're not saying, okay, well, they made teshuvah, we repent, we're going back, we're going to go now, we'll get a job. No, they're saying, okay, they're figuring out, like, oh, how do we do this again now?
You know what's ironic?
It's sad.
If you go look at how even in Jenin, in the West Bank, how they deal with their own that are suspected collaborators. There's no trials. You're on a tree. You're hung in the middle of everyone.
Not me. Yeah, you're right. That's exactly how. No, but listen, it's kind of like
more Torah than we do.
It's like when Saddam Hussein was in Iraq, and listen, this guy. Listen, I'm not the supporter of Saddam Hussein. This guy said he was a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar and he wanted to destroy Israel because he was his Gilgul. Okay, so this guy was wild, a wild wacko. But one thing he knew how to do is he knew how to control the country. He kept the country in order. Obviously, he had to mass murder plenty of defectors and those who didn't agree with him. But he kept the country a country. The moment, unfortunately, that other powers went in, what seemingly happened? It became Sunni, Shia, that everyone started fighting. The place became a terrorist state. It became a real problem, and unfortunately, it created a base. And then Afghanistan, the same thing. So it's sad. DAAT Torah is very important, and DAAT Torah is not one way. We're seeing from here that even when there was DAAT Torah, it sometimes was unagreed upon. It's interesting. So we see here an instance of DAAT Torah which clearly extends beyond the parameters of pure Psak Halacha, deciding whether something is permitted or forbidden by Torah law. Here, DAAT Torah is the expression of an outstanding Torah leader about what is appropriate in the context of building up the holy end of the society of Israel. Okay, let's continue. Whether the phenomenon should be called DAAT Torah or not, there has long existed an awareness in the hearts and minds of Torah greats that even if one cannot pinpoint the exact chapter and verse, there are certain things which are not in the spirit of Torah or even harmful to it, and therefore should be stopped. Thus, when the first tentative steps were taken by advocates of proto-reform, such as rearranging the prayers or modifying traditional synagogue architecture, leading rabbis opposed them because they intuited that these preliminary reforms were the first steps in the attempted dissolution of Torah Judaism. So originally, what Reform Judaism was doing was not asur. Nothing wrong with it. I think they said like Moses Mendelssohn used to wear Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi Tefillin. He used to wear two. He used to dip in the mikveh, which means their initial start didn't seem wrong, but DAAT Torah looked at it and said they're changing something here. They're deviating and they want to make a major change, but they're starting here with this, and they called it out at an early stage. It is my understanding that these quasi-intuitive responses were what the Natziv and Reb Chaim Ozer were referring to when they mentioned DAAT Torah. In his article about DAAT Torah, Lawrence Kaplan cites the eulogy which Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik delivered in 1940 upon the passing of Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grzinski. The Rav's words eloquently define the phenomenon we are discussing. The very same priest whose mind was suffused with the holiness of the Torah, of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, of Abaye and Rava, of the Rambam and the Rabad, or Ra'avad, of the Bet Yosef, and the Rema, could all discern with the Holy Spirit, Ro'eh Beruach HaKodesh, the solution to all current political questions, to all worldly matters, to all ongoing current demands. So on the bottom he says here, cited by Kaplan in DAAT TORAH, page 8 and 9. I concur with Rabbi Wein, see note 2, that it is insulting to the memory of Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal to imply, as Kaplan seems to, that the Rab only adopted this attitude when he addressed the Agudah, but would have expressed a different sentiment where he's speaking to a Mizrahi convention. Interesting. So Rav Kaplan was trying to put down Has v'Shalom Rav Soloveitchik, saying that if he spoke to the Agudah, he would give one direction, while he spoke to the Mizrahi, he would do another. Let's continue. The Chazon Ish expresses a similar sentiment, decrying the policy to divide the Torah into different parts, ruling on Isur v'Heter as one part, and ruling about matters in the marketplace of life as a second part. Cited by Lekach Tov Devarim 2, page 20, the same attitude is evident in Or El Hanan 2, page 76, elaborating on the role of the true Torah leader as reaching beyond only informing others what Jewish law requires in any specific instance. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky seems to feel that the true Torah leader will intuit what Hashem wants as follows. A practical example of zealousness, not based on a strict reading of the law, arises from the following question. What should a person do if he has the choice to marry a Jewish girl who will not follow the laws of family purity, or to marry a non-Jewish woman? Which is preferable? A scholar who has not served an apprenticeship with a major posek sufficiently would certainly say that inasmuch as relations with a nidah, a woman who is not immersed in mikveh, in accordance with laws of family purity is punishable by divine excitation, is karet, from the Jewish people, therefore it would be better to marry the non-Jew. Nevertheless, the Rambam ruled differently, meaning if you actually look at the halacha, what is the isur of sleeping with a woman who didn't dip in a mikveh, right, versus a non-Jewish woman, seemingly the non-Jewish woman would be less severe. But Harambam ruled differently. No, he should marry the Jewish woman instead, and it's brought down in Emet Yaakov Pasha Vayechi, page 237.
But the non-Jewish woman would also be Nida.
Yes, but she doesn't have Nida. It's different.
Really?
Yeah, it's not the same classification like a Jewish woman. Rav Kamenetsky is indicating that there are meta halacha considerations which the true Torah personality factors into the equation before issuing a ruling, considerations which are beyond the scope of even most rabbinic scholars, let alone the ordinary individual. As we pointed out in the metaphor of the doctor dispensing medical advice based on his intuition after years of study and practice, the scope of his conceptualization and the validity of his advice transcend the pedestrian advice of one local's GP. Thus, too, DAAT TORAH, all students of Rambam grasp that this is the implication of Rambam's writing Yir Eli. Sometimes rabbis write in their books Yir Eli, meaning it seems to me. That's what it literally means. That which seems to write to Rambam is the product of a lifetime spent totally immersed in the Torah, and it behooves all Jews to take his conclusions to heart. Interesting. A wonderful illustration of this ability to view an issue from a broad historic perspective can be seen in the development of the Beis Yaakov movement. Although traditionally Jewish girls had received all their formal Jewish training at home, after World War I, Sarah Schneer Zatzal became convinced that rudimentary training alone could not compete with the lure of modern society, which beckoned and beguiled young women to abandon their religious observance. Inspired by her conviction, she sought the support of the Chafetz Chaim in starting to educate girls in a school setting. That visionary Torah leader appreciated the immediacy of the problem and championed her cause, although there were other great Torah figures who did not yet, at the time, see the need. Ultimately, virtually all agreed. So DAAT TORAH sometimes can be argued by other DAAT TORAH, and seemingly later on they could change their opinion. If our discussion so far is the correct reading of what many of our greatest Torah figures have written for centuries, I believe it comes close to serving as a working model, or perhaps even a definition of DAAT TORAH. Limitations. In ancient times, the Supreme Sanhedrin in Jerusalem was empowered to issue rulings binding on all Jews. That was the authority of DAAT Torah then. Nowadays, however, that prerogative no longer exists. In today's circumstances, any Jewish ruler or leader or even posek possesses only limited authority, confined to the area over which he presides, whether it be his students or a congregation, a town, or even a state, and maybe even a country. No sweeping pronouncements by one individual can obligate all Jews to follow. And this is brought down in one of the shoots of the Maharik in number 161. This is very important to know this. This is why today, even myself, I have like 5 rabbis. Not that I need 5 rabbis, it's that I need 1 rabbi for, let's say, Hilchot Nida. I need 1 rabbi for Hilchot Safrut. I need 1 rabbi for Hashkafa. I have 2 rabbis for Hashkafa. I need 1 rabbi for questions on Shulchan Aruch in depth. I have 1 dayan that I'm in contact with when I have major halacha situations and questions to look at. And then there's also Rashi Yeshivot that from time to time I'll reach out or email or call or text in order to ask questions. I haven't found 1 person that can do it all. Nor do I really believe there exists 1 person to do it all. Both time limitation and both whether they actually want to. Which is probably, the reality is no, they don't. The Rivash in his responsa affirms this limitation. A rabbi is entitled to make pronouncements binding only for his students or his congregation, and certainly it is not possible for 1 rabbi to make decrees or ordinances for a country other than his own. This is a great one. Why? And this is brought down number 271. Because this brings up the question of, let's say, forced vaccinations from the issue of the Torah. Could a rabbi inform someone that he has to take it? Could somebody a rabbi that's living in Israel, as we've seen, we saw in Rav Musafi, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and others who had said to take it, while others said, Shav ve'al taseh adif, which means wait, or like, let's see, or like, why jump into it? And there were arguments on this, and this was an issue of DAAT Torah. Because nobody could force anyone. There is halacha discussions of whether or not this could be true, but that halacha discussion could be very quickly annulled because of what is in a vaccine. Back in the day, what was an original vaccine versus what is today, and they're seemingly not the same anymore. One only needs to just review and see, what are the makeups of how these things were originally, made. Originally, it was like an attenuated form of a very weak form of the virus itself, and just that. While today, from my understanding, and I'm no expert in this, it's seemingly that there's more things in it. That's seemingly what it seems like. And while back in the day, when they originally were around, there was liability, while today there's absolutely no liability. So, like, all these things have to be reviewed by DAAT Torah and from the Hashkafa of the Torah to see it. I have a rabbi that I learn with from Israel that comes from time to time, and he was very pro to do it. And while I've seen others here that said, okay, we appreciate his opinion very, very much. He's a huge Talmid Chacham, but we're not going to listen, and nor do we have to listen, because the Torah states there's halacha parameters of where his halacha and law binding rulings go. They might go to his own students, his own yeshiva, his own town, but definitely not to another group in another country. Nor even if you ask them, are you binded to it, based on what we're seeing here. In the light of all these limitations upon the authority of a rabbi, no matter how great in matters of halacha, how much more does this apply to matters of hashkafa, ideology? The Meshech Chochmah, that was Rav Meir Simcha Cohen Medevinsk, makes a very important point. Even a great and true Torah leader whose vision of Judaism is clear and whose wisdom is profound has to decide not only what is the right thing to do, but also how the people will perceive it. He brings in another point to Meshech Chochmah. Meshech Chochmah states that failure to do this was the true sin of Moshe Rabbeinu at Mei Merivah. Moshe Rabbeinu had made it his policy never to act on his own, for fear that the people would ascribe to magical or divine powers to him, which he didn't want. However, when challenged by Korach, he deviated from that policy and declared that Korach should be swept away by a supernatural, unique punishment, as indeed he was. When the people at a later time accosted him for lack of water, he reverted to his previous mode and was not proactive in trying to get them water. Although his motivation was wonderful, it had a negative effect. The people complained, see, for his own honor against Korach, he goes out to fight, but for us, he sits back. This was the complaint of the people. Of course, we are never, has v'shalom, going to say anything in any way to ever even look at Moshe Rabbeinu in a negative light. That's never what we're going to do. But we have to evaluate why the Torah is telling us these events and why the people were complaining. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, the very embodiment of what is DAAT Torah, there is no better definition of who would be a DAAT Torah than Moshe Rabbeinu. He is the definition. If we could even Has v'Shalom say it, in not realizing how his very fine policy would be misinterpreted by the Jewish people. Not that he did something wrong, it was misinterpreted. And that was the Meshech Chochmah says something that needs to be taken into consideration. Therein certainly lies a profound lesson for Jewish leaders in all ages. Parenthetically, we may note that lack of confidence in their leaders' objectivity is a major detriment to communal, let's see here, he continues, to communal discipline. No matter how judicious and desirable rabbinic pronouncements may be, if people anticipate that certain wealthy or powerful or well-connected individuals are not pressured to adhere to standards demanded from others, they will balk at any attempt to set limits to on their own behavior. As an example, if people were to get the impression that certain individuals are exempt from following recently issued guidelines for limiting ostentation and excessive spending at weddings, there would be little incentive for others in the community to adhere to them. Or when a Jewish bookstore is picketed because it sells sefarim by Rav Kook, and no protest is heard from rabbinic leadership, it fosters a feeling that the rabbinic leadership kowtows to certain groups or individuals. Under the circumstances, lack of respect for DAAT Torah abounds. I'll give you the best example that happened in Brooklyn, New York. There was a short time where they tried to limit in the Syrian community lavish weddings. Okay? They tried to tell people, stop spending $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 on these weddings, or even more, or do them in these special places. Two things happened that really annulled it, and it really just went into the sand and got buried. Two things. One, a few prominent rabbis married into very wealthy families, and they made very lavish weddings. So clearly, the standard was for everyone, but not for thee, And when that happened, I heard it from tens of people. What a bizayon it was, because these were the same individuals just a few months earlier were telling people don't do this.
When was it?
This was like over 10, 15 years ago. But when it happened, the people were like, I don't get it. When it came to everyone, you had a standard. When it came to yourself, you were above the standard, or for those. And so it did two things. One, they never spoke about it again. And number two, a lot of what they were saying forward on issues like this were dismissed very quickly, because people said, well, if you were in that situation, you would be above the law here. And that seemingly, it affected people's reaction, and they were right. Because, when we look in the Gemara, it was one of the Tanaim, when he had passed away, there was an issue with doing lavish funerals. And he made an example out of himself, that he got buried with just shroud. I think it was Rabban Gamliel. And when that happened, people saw, he did it for himself. The standard got lowered. People look at the top, they look at the leadership, and when they see the leadership do something, they subsequently will follow it all the way through. And furthermore, there's another issue. When the wealthiest of the community are going to violate what the rabbis are doing, and then kosher it by inviting those rabbis to their events, that seemingly koshers it in another way. So meaning the rabbis themselves may not do it, and they may be opposed to it, but by coming and supporting that, you seemingly are saying, it's okay.
It's corruption.
Listen, I don't want to use. Listen, I understand that they use the word corruption. I don't want to use the word corruption because these are our rabbis. These are Talmidei Chachamim. Listen, the world is not perfect, and perfection is not what is required. Here we're discussing the topic as to why DAAT Torah seemingly will say do this in one way and then not stand up in another way, like in the situation of Rav Kook's books, where people seemingly would not be okay with it. Just as a side note, anyone who has a comment on Rav Kook's books seemingly has not learned them. or learn the mass of them, because there's so I use the Otzar Chochmah. There's so many, and they're so great, and there's so much Torah in them.
Sister Rav Kook, that was head Rabbi of Israel.
Yeah, expounding on the concept of rabbinic authority, the Maharitz.
I heard that one time Rabbi said, "Do what the Rabbi said, but don't do what the rabbis
do." Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Yossi, for that great comment. Expounding on the concept of rabbinic authority, Maharatz Chayut concurs that the Sanhedrin was empowered to issue binding.
No, but 1 second before. This is. It's not just for the bad. I'm talking. Sometimes you see the rabbi doing something, and you think this is look what he's doing, but you don't know the reason behind it, or you don't know. Sometimes you take it to the wrong way, or you don't know the whole story.
Yeah.
So don't do what they do.
That's not just with rabbis. That's with everybody.
Yeah. No. Listen.
Right, but you go with the rabbi, you see, if the rabbi is doing this, I can do this, but it's not true, because it could be that the rabbi now have this special case, or you have a reason.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, there's a reason why you're supposed to dan the kaf zechut all the time, but sometimes the dan the kaf zechut is impossible when it's all out. It's all just outwardly there. It's very hard. Even it's close to impossible. You understand? Especially when sometimes the individual rabbis will tell you outwardly they don't care, or or they'll ignore the question. I've seen it happen so many times. It is what it is. But here we're just discussing how do we define this term of what is DAAT Torah, and what is the power of this DAAT Torah? Is it a powerful thing? Expanding the concept of rabbinic authority, I'll tell you why. We're going to get to the Holocaust very soon here. I know you've been asking me about this, and it was one of the philosophical questions as to if you're going to endow these individuals and grant them this DAAT Torah, quote unquote, are they responsible for the people if they seemingly mess up? We'll find out very soon. Expounding on the concept of rabbinic authority, Maharitz Chayut concurs that the Sanhedrin was empowered to issue binding directives for all Jews. But he notes that was only specifically when a matter was adjudicated in a conclave of all the sages who were then present in Lishkat HaGazit, which is the official meeting place by the temple, by the Beit HaMikdash. He brings down on Kol Kitvei Maharitz Hayut, page 109. He also cites Ran, the Ramban, Nachmani, Rashba, Rambam, which is in Moreh Nevuchim, that's the Maimonides, Maharik, and Rabach as agreeing with his position. It is the opinion of Shut Ya'abetz 153 that once the rabbis have met in conclave and voted on a position, it is forbidden for the individual rabbi in the group to continue to maintain a diversion of option. It should also be noted that such a conclave, although certainly desirable, does not possess the authority of the Sanhedrin of old. Rav Chaim Ozer Grzinski in Igrot Achiyaseh 286-288 is opposed to establishing a Sanhedrin at this time. There's a question, why have we not established a Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael yet? It's a whole question. I hope to possibly go into that topic here, B'ezrat Hashem, in the future, as to who are the pros, the yays, and the nays on having a actual Sanhedrin. He continues to add particularly that as far as the options of individual rabbis recorded in the Talmud, one may even have issued decrees for their own students or city. All these do not fall within the rubric of do not deviate from their words, inasmuch as they were not formulated in an official conclave of all scholars, which would apply to all Jews. This happened in the Syrian community also, when it came to signing the edict, which bans conversions within the Syrian community. To marry a convert. We are going to be doing the entire Syrian edict here in detail. I'm almost done with my work on it. I had to actually rewrite. I took the original document that Rabbi Jacob Kassin, Rabbi Yaakov Katzin had done. He wrote it in Chatzi Kulmus, not in the traditional script of the Hebrew, of the Ashkenaz style. I retyped it up, I organized it, and I'm retranslating it exactly to what he actually wrote in there, and we're going to read what he wrote along with the follow-up affirmations to see it. But there was one rabbi who was opposed to signing the reaffirmation, or seemingly that was the story that came out. According to what we see here, once he signs, he cannot retract and go against the group. He's got to stay with the group. and he can't deviate from it. Okay, so let's continue. He continues to add particularly that as far as the options of an individual rabbis recorded in the Talmud, who may even have issued decrees for their own students or city, all these do not fall within the rubric of do not deviate from their words, and as much as they were not formulated in an official conclave of all the scholars which would apply to all Jews. So even when they made gezerot specifically for a town, it was done by themselves for their people in their own conclave. It wasn't for everybody. In essence, that was the role played by the great Sanhedrin. Millennia ago. There are few major problems with implementing DAAT Torah in a practical sense. There is precious little confidence in the Jewish world nowadays that leaders, even rabbis, are always rendering objective, unbiased opinions. There is apprehension that in this deceitful, mercenary world, some untoward influence may impinge on the pure distillation of Torah knowledge which the leader possesses. As Chazon Ish concludes in one of his letters, but nevertheless, the praiseworthy of a Torah scholar does not qualify him under his fear of God, unless his fear of God takes precedence over his wisdom, and the Torah wisdom does not find its place in a closed heart. He brings that down on this number 24. What we see from this is that a lot of times you see the lack of objectivity. Like I've seen Batei Dinim who took cases from people that donated the name on the Beit Din themselves. And I laughed at this. I was like, what? I was like, you're taking a case from someone whose name is on the building? I'm like, I don't even know. I mean, I didn't obviously get involved in any way. But looking at that, one begs the question, like, hey, maybe you should excuse yourself from that case. Or sometimes they've actually ruled in favor of the wealthy person that donated to them. And when people see this, it tends to weaken their emunah big time. Another major problem is that we have a tremendous mistake in what the differences of what darshanim are and talmidei chachamim are. A darshan is a public speaker, someone who was gifted with a good tongue and how to put together Torah classes and teach them. That does not necessarily mean they are knowledgeable in the Torah. You understand? It's a big difference. Sometimes you have people that are rabbis that are marketed extremely well on the forefront of technology, books, authors, and writing, but they're seemingly they lack a lot of real Torah or other things, whether it might be midot or things of that nature. And what happens is, because of their ability to go to that form of the marketing and everything, it seemingly makes people believe that they are the de facto knowledge in the Torah. What I've seen is that the de facto Torah knowledge comes specifically from yeshivot, from kolelim in Eretz Yisrael. There are some here in the United States, but most of them are from Israel. Why? Because when I ask a question to a rabbi in Israel, in a Beit Din there, he don't know anything about my background in the sense, I'm asking him for a specific question on Halacha, or if Hashkafa has to do with me, he needs to know the background of what the situation is. But he can give a very clear answer that's unconvoluted. It's not in any way affected by external pressures, and he don't care if my neighbor is gonna not like his opinion. He lives 3,000 miles away. It's not going to affect him in any way. And so that's important to know. We'll end it here today. B'ezrat Hashem, tomorrow we will continue. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.